going to spend this Sunday and next Sunday exploring one of Jesus' most well-known stories, the parable of the Good Samaritan. The reason we're doing this for 2 weeks is because the students in our children's nurture ministry on Sunday mornings will be exploring the parable of the Good Samaritan all this month, all the month of January. So this might be an interesting time to coordinate what's going on here with what's going on in other parts of our facility, and that might lead to some interesting discussions with parents and their children or grandparents and their grandchildren. I really like the idea of coordinating everything that's going on or some of the thing that's going on by having everyone look at the same biblical passage. We did something like that in our previous church in Champaign, Illinois, where children and youth and adults all studied the same text and then would, in worship, hear a sermon on that very same text. And that did lead to many interesting conversations. Today, we look at the parable of the Good Samaritan, but we're not going to actually get to the parable itself. Today, we're going to look at the conversation that leads up to the parable, and then next Sunday, we'll talk about the parable. Here's the setup to one of the most well-known stories Jesus told. A lawyer stands up to test Jesus. This lawyer is a scribe, an expert in the Jewish law, and he is not a fan of Jesus. He stands up to test him. That means to draw him out, to engage him in a debate, to expose him to others, to who he thinks Jesus really is. To this lawyer, Jesus is an uneducated, uncredentialed, outspoken Galilean who's really not worthy of attention. So quite insincerely, the lawyer asks, "Teacher," he says sarcastically, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" Lots of things interesting in that question, but one of them is the exact form of the verb do. What must I do? It's singular. The lawyer is asking for the one thing I must do. And not do over and over again, but just do once and then be done with it. Amy Jill Levine is a professor of New Testament at Vanderbilt University and former theologian in residence here at Grosse Presbyterian Church. And about this, she writes, "The lawyer is thinking of something to check off his to-do list. Recite a prayer, offer a sacrifice, put a 20 in the collection plate." So what this lawyer is doing is this. He's trying to expose Jesus as being shallow, as being a lightweight. Meaning, if he can answer this question, this important question, with just a brief, simple, do this one time answer, then this shows him to be the lightweight that he thinks he is. This lawyer is really looking for the Jeopardy answer to a much larger question. And he's trying to entice Jesus into a debate. Jesus does not take the bait. And Jesus does not escalate the conflict. No one ever learns anything new by losing an argument. Jesus sees this test as an opportunity for learning, an opportunity to show something new to this lawyer and the people who are listening in. So Jesus responds to the lawyer's questions by using something that is sometimes called the Socratic method, answering a question with a question. So Jesus says, "What is written in the law?" Here's the question coming back. "And what do you read there?" Now, that's an interesting question. For those of us with modern ears, we don't think too much of it. We kind of move quickly past that. What do you read there? But if you stop a second and think, well, Jesus is asking this question in a context where most people do not read. The culture in which Jesus lived was largely illiterate. What would people have to read? This is before books. They would have a few scrolls and some tablets, not the digital kind, the stone kind. This is all they would have to read, and so most people could not read. Jesus could read. How did Jesus learn to read? His parents taught him. His parents took him to the synagogue, where that was the place to learn to read, and this was a value in their lives. And this says something about Mary and Joseph's parenting, that Jesus, a peasant, could read. A lawyer obviously could read, an expert in the Jewish law. But for Jesus to ask him, "What do you read there?" It's kind of a bold question. Jesus may just be appealing to the lawyer's ego in this question. "Surely, sir, you know the answer. After all, you are a trained religious professional." Jesus is providing an opportunity for the lawyer to display his knowledge in public. Isn't this fascinating? Even though the lawyer is trying to trip Jesus up and make him look bad, Jesus responds by giving him an opportunity to shine. And the lawyer does know the answer to the question. He knows the answer to the question he is asked. Don't you hate it when people do that to you? When they ask you a question and they know the answer. They just want you to say it. The lawyer says, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself." The lawyer is combining two verses from the Jewish Torah, the heart of their Bible, the first 5 books of our Bible. He's combining Deuteronomy 6:5, the Shema, the heart of Jewish faith. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. He's combining that verse with another verse, which is found in Leviticus 18:19. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And this lawyer wasn't the first to do this. This was the common practice in Judaism at that time and Judaism in this time, to affirm that what the faith is all about is love your God and love your neighbor. The lawyer is correct here. He's giving the right answer, and Jesus acknowledges that. You have given the right answer, Jesus says. Do this and live. Do this and you will live. The lawyer has the right answer. But just having the right answer isn't enough, is it? You also have to live it. It's not enough just to know the right answer. It's not enough just to believe certain things are true. It's not enough. You have to actually put this into practice. You have to actually make this real in your life. Do this, and you will live. And what's interesting about that is that the verb do is different when Jesus says it than when the lawyer says it. Because when Jesus says it, he's not talking about a one-time thing, something you only have to do once. He's talking about a continuing thing, something that is supposed to be a part of your everyday life that you do over and over again. He says, do this. That's a command. That's an imperative. Do this and don't ever stop doing it. What must I do to inherit eternal life? Insincerity aside, this really is an important question. Jesus treats it like this. It's not a question about living forever. It's not a question about going to heaven. It's not a question about what happens after we die. Eternal. That word doesn't refer as much to the length of time as it refers to God. Eternal life is life with God here and now. So Jesus is interpreting this question as, how do I live with God? How do I make my life meaningful with God's presence, significant by following God's commands, important by doing and living the way God asked me to live? What must I do to inherit eternal life is a question about living life with God, living life with meaning and purpose and significance as God intends. And this is an important question because this question addresses our aspirational identity. This question addresses who we aspire to become and the kind of life we aspire to live. Aspirational identity. That phrase comes from the advertising and marketing world. All advertising, all marketing is directed towards your aspirational identity. Use this kind of deodorant and you'll have this kind of life. Use this credit card and you'll have this kind of life. Drive this vehicle and you'll have this kind of life and be this kind of person. Advertising, marketing appeals to our aspirational identity as consumers. We are what we buy. Aspirational identity appeals to our sense of what groups we belong to, who we identify with in our culture. Adopt this opinion and be part of this part of the spectrum, and you'll have this kind of life. And aspirational identity appeals to our chronology, how old we are. If you do this or use this or think this, your age won't show, and people will think you are young. And we are biased chronologically in this culture. Aspirational identity, about being a consumer, about being a caricature, about chronology, how old we are. But none of these things actually define us, actually shape us in real ways. Jürgen Moltmann is a world-renowned theologian. He's just become 90 years old. I met him one time when I was a student at Princeton Seminary. I was on work study at Princeton. Did they still have work study? It meant they gave you a little money if you would work one of the necessary jobs around campus. And I couldn't get the job in the library, and I couldn't get the job at the radio station. I got the job in the cafeteria. I put the peas on the plates for 2 years. And one day, Jürgen Moltmann came by, and I put the peas on his plates. And he said, "Thank you." And I said, "You're Jürgen Moltmann." And he said, "Thank you." And that's the extent of the conversation we had. In his latest book, he's got a great opening sentence. The modern world takes its bearings from a humanistic and naturalistic concept of life. And in doing so, it experiences a diminished life. Christian life takes its bearings from a relationship with the living Lord. And in doing so, it experiences the fullness of life. Humanistic and naturalistic conception of life. This is the life that the modern world portrays to us as good. And we're consumers and we're caricatures, and it's all about how old we are. But then there's another way. The Christian life says it's all about the fullness that comes from living in relationship to eternal God. And this is all about love. Your ability to love, your willingness to love. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. To love God is to know that your purpose in life is to glorify God and enjoy God forever. To glorify God is to delight in God's presence. And once you do that, you delight in all of life. And that's to enjoy God forever. And to love your neighbor as yourself is to realize that everyone has been made in the image of God. And thus they are worthy of your care and your respect and your kindness and your love. So when all is said and done, none of us will be measured by how much we accomplish, but by how well we love. How well we love God and our neighbor as ourselves. Do this, and you will live. That's the Jeopardy answer. It would fit right on the show, right up there on the board. Inherit eternal life. What is? Do love and live. And do it every day. Every single day. God's given us plenty of love to share. We never run out. So if this lawyer was smart, he would have thanked Jesus right then and there. And he would have turned and walked away and gotten on with his life and just loved as much as he could. Loved God, loved his neighbor. But he's a lawyer. He's got a point to prove. His aspirational identity is bound up with his being right. A humble, compassionate response to Jesus just wasn't going to happen. So instead, he proves his insincere intent towards Jesus by posing an even more obnoxious question. Who is my neighbor? We'll talk about that one next week.